Okay, I'm cooking French fries here. You can see there, I got a nice feed of French fries going on there. Getting my fry on. I am. Getting my fry on. I am on a Tuesday afternoon here at Camp Crazy. Anyway, I got to tell you a story now. This is something that happened when I was driving a taxi cab. It's actually more than one story, but it all ties in together. And it's one of the reasons that I got as mad as I got at the police. I had problems with the police even prior to that, but in 1990, when I was driving a cab, I really had troubles with them. So I'll tell you these two stories anyway, and they'll illustrate the point of why I got to be the way I was with regard to the police and the way the police operate and so on. And now the first story has to do with a young guy. Wasn't much younger than me really at the time. I was only 22 in 1990. I was driving a taxi cab in the town of Perth, Ontario, Canada. Anyway, this guy, this young guy that I worked with there, he used to pump gas at the gas station, and he used to dispatch the cabs. We worked out of a Mr. Gas station. Anyway, this guy, he had a girlfriend, and he was really in love with his girlfriend. I think he was convinced he was going to marry her someday and all that, and he was just really in love with her. She might have been the first girl he had ever been with. I really don't know, but anyway, he definitely loved her, and I think he believed she loved him. Maybe she did at some point. I don't know. I mean, possibly, possibly she did. But anyway, this girlfriend of his, she showed up one day there at the gas station when this fella was working, and she had this other guy with her. This other guy, and she informed her boyfriend, that worked at the gas station there. She informed him that they were finished. They were no longer a couple. Relationship was over. This was her new boyfriend, and she was going to go with him to a cottage, some cottage somewhere, and they were going to consummate their new relationship at this cottage. Well, naturally, he was heartbroken. He was just totally devastated, and way down in the dumps, which was understandable. I mean, you get your heart broke, you love somebody, and they turn around and do you like that. It's understandable. Anybody would be heartbroken under the circumstances. But anyway, he got himself a bottle, and he started to drink. And the more he drank, the less sad he got, and the more angry he got. They talk about the demon rum, eh? Well, that's what was going on. The sadness was being replaced with anger. I think the longer he thought about what had happened, and, the more alcohol he got under his belt, the more angry he got, the more aggressive he got, the more he got thinking about revenge, which again is perfectly understandable given what happened. But as you know, when you're upset and drunk, that's not the best time to make big decisions. you know, Not the best time to make a big decision, especially a decision that could land you in a lot of trouble for a long time. And so he was talking about he was going to go out. He wanted to go out to the cottage and kill those two, his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend. He wanted to go out there and, basically kill them right there in the bed where they were doing the things they were doing with each other. Now, he knew he was too messed up to drive. He was drunk. Like he was just about falling down drunk. He knew he couldn't drive. And so he starts after me. Take me out to that cottage. Take me out there, Tom. You can take me out there in the cab, in the taxi. I said, no, sir. I won't do that. I said, look, I understand. I've had my heart broken too many times, and I understand. You really love this girl, and she did you dirty. I get it. And I don't blame you for being furious with her, and I don't blame you for being furious with him either. I said, you have every right to feel the way you do. And I'd probably feel the same way. If I was in your shoes right now, I'd probably feel just the same way. So I get it. But I said, I'm going to tell you something. You don't know it yet, because your judgment is clouded with alcohol and grief. But I said, that girl did you a huge favor today. He just looked at me. He said, say what? Are you crazy? And I said, no, I'm not. I said, let me explain where I'm coming from here. I said, imagine now, a few years down the road, you marry this girl. She starts having babies with you. You've got a kid or two. You've got a mortgage. You bought a house. You got a mortgage. All the rest of it. And then what does she do? But she pulls a stunt like the one she did today. And I guarantee you, the fact that she did it today tells me that at some point she would have done that. I said, you're lucky it happened today and not in 5 or 10 years. Because I said, you'd have been really in over your head then. I said, she did you a massive favor. And I said, so did that idiot that's now banging her at that cottage. He thinks he's having a good time. He thinks he's won. But I said, what he has won is a whole shit ton of trouble. Because I said, now that's going to happen to him. Or somebody else. Maybe she'll pull the stunt on him before it gets to that point, and it'll be somebody else. But I said that he'll end up married to her and then having to deal with the fallout of her actions. But I said, she did you a huge favor because she showed you who she is. And not only that, but I said, the guy that took her off your hands, I said, he did you a huge favor too. I said, believe it or not, you're the winner in this situation. Although I understand you don't feel like the winner, and I wouldn't either if I was you. Because I'd be right where you're at in your mind right now. But I said, the fact is, because I'm standing on the outside looking in, and so I'm not having the emotional reaction that you're understandably having, I see it more clearly. And I said, I'm telling you, that girl couldn't have done you a better turn than what she did today. I said, probably the best thing she ever did for you was what she did today, believe it or not. Well, he said, I damn well don't believe it, and I want to go out there, and I want to kill those two, and I said, yeah, I understand that, and I don't blame you. But I'm telling you, at some point when you get through all this rough stuff now, you're going to realize that she did you a huge favor. She didn't know she was doing you a favor, but she was. And anyway, this other fella walked in during the conversation. And he said, take him out there. I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, I take him out there and he kills those two. Now I'm an accomplice because I knew what he was going to do when I took him out there. Plus, I said, I wouldn't be much of a friend to the guy if I did that. I said I would just facilitate him ruining his life over that kind of a girl, a girl that would just turn around and do what she did today. So I said, no, I'm not going to do it. Anyway, this guy, he repeated it again. The eyes got narrow, you know, and he said, either you take him out there, or I'm going to beat the hell out of you to punish you for disobeying me. He said, I have given you an order, and you will follow it. Well, this was just a guy coming in off the street. Now, who this guy was is he was the son of one of the Perth police officers. That's who he was. Anyway, I didn't say a word to him at that point. I took a hold of him. It put me into a rage when he told me he was going to punish me for disobeying him and that he'd given me an order and I'd better obey it. That put me into a rage. And I'm having fries. That put me into a rage. And I didn't say a word to him. I just took a hold of him and I frog marched him to the door. Basically just got a hold of him, frog marched him to the door. And then when I got him to the door, now this was a big, heavy aluminum frame commercial door with the glass, from top to bottom and the heavy aluminum frame around the glass and everything. Well, when I pulled the door open, I opened it into his face. When the edge of that door hit his face, it just cracked his face open, basically, give him a big split down his forehead, and the blood was pouring down and everything. Well, head wounds always look worse than they are. I shoved him out into the lot of the gas station, and I told him, if you ever come back here threatening me like that again, I said, I'll do far worse to you. So don't ever do that again. He laughed, and I thought that was the end of it. Silly me to think that would be the end of it, especially when it's a police officer's son that I heard. About half an hour later, it was just like a scene from a Hollywood movie. Sirens. That was the first thing, was the sirens. And then all the cars came into view. Coming down the street, we were on a street here, and there was a street that ran beside our gas station, and there was a street directly in front of our gas station that kind of went away from the street that we were on. And they came from all four directions. And when they came into the yard, they actually were jumping the curbs. Like, those cars were airborne at times, jumping the curbs. And they all piled out of those cars. And of course, one of them was this guy's father. The father of the guy that I had just opened the door into his face, and hurt him. And me and that guy, that cop, ended up standing there in the yard, toe to toe, nose to nose, roaring in each other's faces. And one of the cops that was there, he kind of talked the other cop down. He said, like, this isn't the place. We'll get him another time, he said. And so they backed off and they left. And I was expecting there'd be trouble at some point, but nothing came of it. I was harassed by them, but I was harassed by them anyway, so I didn't really notice the difference. Anyway, that's one story of the kind of service that we used to get, and that you still get a lot of the time from the police. If you're somebody who would be considered a nobody, this is the service you get, and this is the treatment you get. Anyway, moving on. Still, while I was driving a taxi cab, late one night, it was either a Friday or a Saturday night, I'm not sure, but it was a weekend night anyway. And it would have been midnight or 1 in the morning or something like that. Yeah, there's my fries. This girl came into the gas station. Now, I happened to be in there. I was driving that night. The 1984 Buick LeSabre that I drove most of the time as my car, as my taxi cab, was parked outside at the side of the building. Anyway, she came in, and She was visibly shook up. When she was out of breath, it looked like she had been running, or moving real fast anyway. And she was just barely even coherent. She was so worked up. So anyway, me and it was a girl that night. Our boss used to hire young girls a lot of the time to work pumping gas and whatnot. They used to hire eye candy, you could say. Anyway, there was a really pretty young blonde-haired girl working that night. And the two of us got her to sit down in a chair and calm down, enough that she could tell us what was going on. While this is going on, though, a guy has appeared across the street. And he's over there roaring across the street at the gas station at this girl that had just come in. This was a young woman. She'd have been around my age, I'd say in her early 20s, like I was. I don't know who she was. It's not a girl I knew, but well, be about the same age as me. Very pretty girl. Really, really cute. Brunette. Very pretty. Anyway, when she calmed down a bit, this guy's outside roaring and he's going on, "I'm going to rape you, bitch. When I get a hold of you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that," and being very graphic about all the stuff he planned to force upon her. He didn't seem to be one to care about consent, He was just going to take what he wanted. And anyway, she filled us in on the rest of the story. She'd been at a house party on South Street, which is at the far end of town. That's where she had been, a house party. And this guy had zeroed in on her. He was there too. And he had tried chatting her up. And, I guess let her know he was interested. And she wasn't interested. And she, told him so in a roundabout way. And he let her know that whether she was interested or not wasn't really a matter to be considered, because he wanted her and he was going to have her. By hook or by crook, he was going to have her, and that was it. So she decided it was time to leave. But she didn't have any money. So she couldn't hire a taxi cab or whatever, and there was nobody there that could drive her home. Everybody was pretty well wasted, at that point, including the ones who had cars. And so she took off walking. The guy followed her, staying about half a block behind her, roaring all the kinds of nasty things that he was still roaring across the street from our gas station. Anyway, she said, I stopped at the police station. The police station was in the town hall at the time. She had to go past the police station to get to where we were. She stopped at the police station. She asked them for some help. The guy was outside roaring, and apparently you could hear it in the police station. The cop she was talking to heard it. She heard it. The cop she was talking to heard it. She was told, "We are not a taxi service. No, we can't help you. We're not a taxi service." And they sent her back out onto the street with this person who knows what might have happened. So she continued walking until she got to the gas station where we were. Again, about the same distance she had already walked from that house party. She had to walk that far again with this guy behind her, yelling all these nasty things at her, describing in graphic detail all the stuff he was going to do to her. And believe me, he was going to do it all and then some. He wasn't fooling around. He was in for a penny, in for a pounding, I guess you could say. I'm sorry, but that was just too good to resist, in for a penny, in for a pound, Anyway, this was it anyway. He was going to, well, anyway, you know what I'm saying. There wasn't anything that you could possibly done that he wasn't going to force her to do. And that's what he was roaring across the street when we were in the service station there, the gas station. And apparently when she was in the police station, this was being roared, and they could hear it because they had windows open. They could hear it. And they still told her, we're not a taxi service, get lost. And so she had to walk that far again to get to where we were. Well, she had no money. She couldn't pay for a ride. You know, she didn't have any money. We actually were a taxi service, ironically enough. And she couldn't pay. She had no money. Anyway, after we got her calmed down, and like I said, it wasn't easy to do with that yahoo across the street roaring at her. I told her, I said, don't worry about money. I'll get you home. I said, there's nothing else going on right now. I said, we're slow at the moment. So I said, it's no big deal to me to drive you home. And I did. She lives somewhere out in the country. I can't recall where now, and it doesn't matter anyway. But I drove her home. And when I drove her home, when she was getting into my car to go home, the guy across the street started yelling stuff at me. You know, because now I was getting her out of there. He wasn't going to be able to torment her anymore, and he wasn't going to be able to follow her around and possibly get her into a position where he could impose himself on her. And so he started yelling all kinds of shit at me, threats and everything else. I just turned around and told him to F off. I just said, F off, you know, and I got in the car. I drove her home. Like I say, she had no money to pay me, but I drove her home. Never expected to see any money for that trip, you know, just wrote it off as, you know, this is my good deed for today, or whatever, you know. Well, a couple of days later, she'd come into the gas station and she paid the fare on the trip, which wasn't expected at all, you know, but she did. So, but anyway, what a situation, though. I never heard anything more from that guy. I never saw him again or anything. I don't know who he was either, really. I don't know who she was. I don't know who he was. You know, I just know the story she told me. And the story seemed true because, like I say, the guy was right across the street roaring his fool head off, just like she said he'd been doing up at the police station, saying all the stuff that she said that he had been saying. So, anyway, bottom line is, we got her home and got her calmed down and got her home and got her away from that idiot. And, you know, I have my issues with women, for sure. I've had a lot of bad experiences with women. But there was no way I was going to allow... I mean, if I had let her leave there, if I had said, well, you don't have money to pay, so to hell with you, get lost, which I could have done if I had treated her the way the police had treated her. And then she'd gone down the street and that guy had gotten at her and done something to her. And, you know, hurt her or whatever, maybe even killed her, who knows, raped her, beat her up, killed her, who knows. Any combination of those things. I'd have had to live with that, you know. So I wasn't going to allow her to go and get into that situation. Anyway, yeah, it was... But right there, you know, we're not a taxi service. That was the answer she got. We're not a taxi service. You know, just by roaring the things he was roaring at her, he was threatening her with all kinds of stuff to impose all kinds of things upon her. As far as I know, that's a crime. I mean, even if they didn't drive her home, if they had went out there and got him and put him in a cell for the night, that would have solved her problem. And he certainly had grounds to do it. He was drunk and disorderly. He was uttering threats to cause bodily harm, you know. I mean, they could have nailed him with a bunch of charges and put him in a cage, which is exactly where he should have been. Instead, they sent her back out onto the street with the guy. You know, now what would have happened if he had dragged her into an alley or someplace like that along the way while he was following her before she got to where we were? Or what would have happened had I told her to get lost and booted her out of there? You don't have any money, so screw you. You know, get lost. That's your problem. You know, what would have happened? Like, you know. Anyway, the thing is, you know, things like that really turned me off on the police anyway. They really did. There were so many things I saw like that and knew about like that that just turned me right off on the police. And of course, Canada is a country that's very deferential to authority. It's very deferential to authority here. Most of the people believe that if you're in conflict with authority, you're the problem, you know. And so it made things kind of tough at times as far as being able to really get along with other people. But still, it is what it is. I turn the heat off now. Those look good. I think I'm going to like these. I've liked all the ones I've eaten so far anyway. But yeah, so anyway, like I say, I don't know who she was. I don't know who that guy was. But I know it was potentially a very dangerous situation. You know, you hear stories of things like that happening. And then the next thing you know, somebody's found dead in the bushes somewhere or something. So, you know. Anyway, that's it. That's another story for you. You know, stuff that happens, I guess, in the world, eh? You know. I'm going to eat my French fries. We'll see you later.